going to be tricky.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of your favorite cybersecurity podcast, running since September of 2011. Let's do some math. That's a lot of seasons. And hopefully we continue. Hey, I don't know what happened in the last 6 weeks or so. If like everybody told one person to go listen, but thank you. Because we've got at least a 15% bump like month over month. So this is great. I hopefully it's the great content we're providing, but we've had great content for a while.
That's
but
all the AI
anyway,
bots out there, Raf, scraping our stuff to be able to put us in the results.
AI. Go away. No, you go away. All right. I have an episode today that I'm really excited about, mainly because James and I are just going to probably be passengers on this one. I looked at CMMC like 4 years ago when it was about to be like the next big thing. And then I heard that it was the new version was shelved or temporarily suspended or something. And then Bo hit me up and said, hey, there's a new thing coming out. We should talk about it. I looked it up and said, that looks cool. I know nothing about it. Let's do it. So, James, Jim, welcome. Bo, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Rafal. And it's great to be on here. And I got to tell you, I've been listening to this show, for years. And yeah, the last couple of ones, there's been some real, I think last week's was really pretty interesting. I don't know. I usually,
that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, I generally just email you, Rafal, versus posting online. But yeah, I really enjoy your show, and thanks for having me on so we could talk about CMMC and what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah. So we've had you on before. You had a great presentation for us, and we did a whole like screen share and all that on building a security program. Guys, if you haven't watched that one, I don't remember how far back it is. It's not that far back. It's been in the last year, but you should definitely go look it up. I'll post that in the notes if I can find remember to. But that's a great one. It's good to have you back. All right. It is, as we record this, it is end of September of 2025. CMMC, about where are we? What is it? Why is it in the news? And go.
Yeah, hey, Rafal. No, CMMC is just the enforcement mechanism for a rule that's applying to called the Defense Industrial Base, but I know now its name's kind of changing to the War Industrial Base. But the Defense Industrial Base is supposed to have been doing these cybersecurity controls going back to December of 2017. So that all CMMC is, it's got everybody up in arms, is that instead of being able to self-attest, you have to actually get an outside agency to do it. And the DoD actually, instead of using ISO or some other organization, they went and actually created the Cyber AB back in 2020. And they now have got, 300 certified auditors that can actually go out and do it through about 60 companies to actually do these assessments. And I'm actually pretty excited about it because our company's been actually following the rule through self-attestation. We've been through DoD audits, and it's just a way to actually make sure we're protecting the data. And I know Rafal talked about this earlier. My background's in the DoD, and it was not a big secret that our adversaries were getting their information by going into the Defense Industrial Base. And it was very obvious going back to when your show was brand new. I know that I was tracking this, and that we knew back then that the Defense Industrial Base was a source of a lot of information on how on our equipment in the DoD. So this is something that's been around for a long time. And all that they're really doing today is just saying, okay, we don't trust you, we're going to verify, right? So going back to President Reagan back in Berlin back in '83 or so. I mean, it was like trust but verify. So that's all it is, brother.
All right. Hey, Jim, you dabble in this world as well, which is why this is really just basically you and Bo going into it. But what is, for those of the uninitiated into the, as they call it, the DIB, Defense Industrial Base, the war machine for some others, whatever it is. What is DFARS? Either of you guys? I don't care.
Yeah, it's defense. What it is, there's the Federal Acquisition Regulation is the rule that guides all federal spending. basically telling contracting officers regardless if you're in the Department of State, Department of Defense, or War, Department of Interior, no matter what, there's basically clauses in their Homeland Security. So it's Federal Acquisition Regulation, and the DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. And it's a nuanced thing, but the contract clause is in the defense portion, but the actual CMMC rule itself, the program, is actually in the FAR in 32 CFR versus in 48 CFR. So it is something that could be referenced by other departments as well. That's something they did intentionally. We'll see what happens in the future, but they're actually in different sections of the Federal Acquisition Regulation.
So think of the FAR as how the government, all elements of the government, the federal government, IRS, you pick your poison. If they want to go buy something, that has all the sort of constitutionally approved languages that are going to affect providers that are going to be signing contracts. That's the language that goes in the contract. And then there's various titles and sections within there. One of those titles and sections is DFARS for the Department of Defense, or Department of War in this case. And in those, that contains the clauses. Those clauses stipulate requirements that are going to be in various forms like contracts in combination with certain statements that are translated into external requirements. For example, FAR will say in DFARS, you need to be complying with, 800-171. Well, one of the things that became really complicated was which version. And so then that became an alignment. So you have
I can talk into that.
Yeah, we can talk that for days. I mean, I don't know when the deviation is going to be lifted in between 2 or version 3, but of course there was another publication by the defense on closing gaps. So there's a lot going on there as an example, but that's what DFARS is where the language is. So when we're waiting for things to come out, like for example, the most recent one, that sets the language that's going to establish what are some of the contractual requirements, in addition to new language for what it means to solicit the Department of Defense as well.
So what does it mean for security? I mean, this sounds like to me, it sounds like paperwork, right? What does it actually mean for security, you guys? Because you're both on the have to be compliant side. What does that actually mean?
A lot.
Half of it is paperwork, right? Because but I would argue that's most audits. Almost every audit is show me what you say, and then show me that you actually do what you say. I mean, that's a lot of audits. But where it's challenging here is you have to have hundreds of pages of documentation, if not more. I mean, we have, because we've been doing this for years, we literally have tens of thousands of pages of documentation. But the intent there isn't the intent's not to drown them in data, right? You're not trying, this isn't high school or college where you get weighed, you get your grade based on how much your paper weighs. It's more of like, they will ask you how much did you, like any question they have, they're going to be like, show me where you wrote that down. And then they're going to come through and then say, okay, show me the registry settings for that FIPS or what example. That's just the one everybody goes to, is making sure FIPS is turned on in your registries, both at the host and at the firewall. So they'll actually check that. But the version, I don't want to go too far down that, because I agree with Jim, you could talk forever on it. But the thing is, Jim, there's no way this thing would have gotten passed if they would have done a bait and switch, because they said for years, we're just going to audit what you've been saying you've been doing. That has been the refrain from the DoD for years. So that if they actually swapped them out because there's a new one out there, there could have been a very obvious, no, dude, you actually changed the requirements by 40%, and now you're going to start, auditing us. So I personally believe, this is my not written down anywhere, but my personal belief is you won't see that one get actually out there until the end of the 3-year burn-in period. I think that's when you'll see them swap it out. I think they're going to wait that long personally, just because they have to get it out there, right? And the whole intent was it's supposed to be zero cost, or just the cost of the assessment, where if you change out the requirements by 40%, then you open it up to people saying, hey, I'm going to raise my rates. So I think they're going to defer that
if I may
get it out there.
For our listeners who may not be super familiar, so Bo just said something really interesting. I'll just give some context around it. There's a huge elements around the requirements, which are based on SB 171, specifically reversion 2, even though there's a revision 3. And the idea here is in all the papers leading up to the codification of CMMC, which is ultimately turned into 32 CFR 170, is the entire concept is based on the fact, literally, you should already be doing this. And as a matter of fact, in version 2, there are, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's 61 NFOs. These are basically controls that are implied that you should be doing. They're not even defined. They're just like, here's 60 of them that you really should be doing, and we're not even going to define them for you because you should be doing them. So the entire sort of concept of this is they're saying it really shouldn't cost you anything outside of the assessment because you should be doing them. And in the defense of the Department of War, the DOW, is if you recognize that CMMC and the Congress basically saying go to NIST to create the standard around your new certification program, which was materialized in late 2019, 2020 out of the Congress, if you look at that, to what Bo said earlier, you should have been already doing it for 3 or 4 years. So we kind of set ourselves up for failure by not doing it necessarily the right way. And then now that we're being forced to do it, it's like, well, it shouldn't cost you anything because this is just certifying that you already are doing it. So it was a very, very interesting dynamic.
Well, I thought it was brilliant on their part, the way they did it. I mean, I personally wasn't a fan of how long it took to implement. I thought it took, I thought the pause anyway, but what they're doing is chess. I mean, I feel like it's really smart with the new rule is you can't give someone a purchase order unless they give you their proof they passed the test. And you have to share that with the DOD or DOW, whatever. You have to actually share that. That's going to be a requirement starting in November. I thought that was a pretty smart way of doing it.
How does this differ from?
Well, yeah, originally started off as the. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, like, how's this differ? You're saying that it's, requires verify what you're saying from like SOC or something like that. I mean, those require verifying certain things. Are these covering different questions or controls that are different, or just different industry? Or
I've never personally been through a SOC 2. I've read hundreds of reports just because we use SAS and that's the gold standard, right? You read your SOC 2, but having been through ISO, SOCs, and I don't know what, and all Cyber Essentials for the Brits, that this is much more in your network. It really is like, show me. I mean, the paperwork's massive, but the actual thing they're looking for is like, you have to demonstrate to a much more I mean, I love my ISO auditors, but a lot of them are accountants. Same thing with SOCs, they're accountants. These are actually, in theory, you're getting people that have actually done what you've been doing, and they can actually know, okay, actually show me your firewall, and they can actually tell when they look at the firewall whether or not you're actually implementing FIPS. Like they could actually look at it, as opposed to maybe some other people you could actually go much higher level conversations. That's been my experience gone through 5 of these assessments.
Does it become more scoped or better scoped then? Because I know like SOC, you have the issue of, SOC report from this company could be different from that company because it depends on what's in scope and all that stuff. Is CMMC much more, this is the scope. Like there's no, like a report from you is the same as a report from.
Well, I'm hesitant to making too many comparisons with SOC because SOC isn't a certification, it's a report. And you can actually say the guy sucks at A, B, and C, and you still have the report. Yeah. But if you don't read page 47 of the 87-page report, you're not going to know. I mean, because you have to literally go, if you've read them, you know this, you have to go through and look at each of the controls, and they'll let you know if there was something that was odd, right? Or something that wasn't expected. Well, so this is different. This isn't where, you have to read a 100-page report afterwards. I mean, all you really get is a certificate that has a front, and in the back has all of your cage codes. And the front has they don't want you to ever publish this public facing, which annoyed the heck out of us at first because we were wanting to brag. But it has something called a CMMC unique identifier, which is just a 10-digit code. And I figured out why. Okay, they don't want those out on the internet because then people could start faking them. Because it's not that hard to crack the code if you've seen it. And then you could actually just, I'm not saying people have no integrity, but someone might be, it might actually make a fake number just knowing that it's out there and hoping that they don't catch that it's not their company that's connected to it. So that's all you get from a CMMC assessment. It's a pass, it's a validation, unless you get there is a chance you might get the provisional pass, which means you have 6 months to fix some stuff. But most companies are going to pass or fail because there's only a minority of control likely to actually push them off for 6 months. Most of them you have to get right at the time of the assessment. So I hope that answered your question, James.
No, that's perfect.
By the way, James, something, and I thought the question was brilliant. Just to add 2 cents here is, you can make something, that trash can the scope of a SOC, or you can make it the scope of assessment or whatever, right? Now, one of the things that got really good at that was PCI. And then we saw the sort of isolation of my credit card processing environment, right? So since CMMC is inherently tied to CUI, and there's very specific sort of language that what all that means is wherever that is, where it's being stored, processed, or transmitted is your scope. So you can't hide like, wow, I empty that trash can every day and I'm level 5, capability maturity on taking care of my trash can, when in fact your whole network is full of trash, kind of thing, which we all see a lot of that. This part of the building is ISO certified as an example, right? But with CMMC is you have to define those scopes. And what's more important, is equally important, is if that scope were to change, you have to be reassessed. So when you get assessed, you get certified, and there's a number of ways to do that. It may last for 3 years, but you have to say every year that nothing has changed. So for small businesses, especially organizations that are trying to do a lot of development and be innovative and try to figure out how to make the next, cool thing, there's a lot of fluidity. So I can tell you, we already have challenges like, okay, we're going to lock it down. Okay. Oh, we got to we're going to buy a new manufacturing facility. Well, guess what? We got to do the whole assessment again, because now that the scope has changed. So it's a very different animal. You're just not saying, hey, this is our network. Come take a look at it. Great. We're certified, or we pass this test. It is bonded to your environment and the document. So all the documentation is Bo is talking about, when you get that external assessment from a cyber IB certified assessor, in most cases, and Bo, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they basically hash your documentation, right? So we
actually hash it. That was something they made clear. They wanted us to hash it because they didn't want it. I mean, like, dude, you guys can't run a script either.
They want to hash.
I mean, come on, it's not that hard. Yeah, fine, I can run a script too. But we have to hash it. There is something though that it's worth highlighting. You talk about scoping. I'm sorry, but the scoping is actually really a big deal, James, because some organizations try to do something called an enclave. And then sometimes they haven't really thought it out that well, because they haven't realized, well, maybe you're building this crystal palace, but if your email's in scope, how are you like that? Because what do you mean my email's in scope? Well, can someone email you the documents that have CUI? Of course they can. Well, then it's a much bigger scope than you thought. It's actually, a lot of organizations don't think about all the places they can get controlled unclassified information. And that's actually one of the hardest things you do, is actually try to figure out if you can make it work in an enclave, which is much cheaper, or if you have to do your entire enterprise, which is what we did. We did our entire enterprise for level 2. We're still trying to figure out how to do level 3, if it'd be better to do enterprise or enclave. That's something we're working through.
That sounds interesting. I can't, like, I'm trying to get my head around this. This starts to feel, we were talking about PCI for government, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I've done those audits too. Yeah, you're right, and they can. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's not a bad analogy.
So,
but I think, and this is where I get in trouble though, because I think there's a lot more ambiguity than I think there's a lot of desire to kind of make it nice and clean cut and stuff like that. But as you start to get into the nuance of it, is how is your assessor interpreting the standard and how it's being applied in your environment? How did you interpret it? And how are you interpreting that? Right. So I've been in a number of environments where, I'll ask the question, I'll be right there in the Pentagon. I'll ask the question. And I've been told straight up by a non-government official, I won't touch that with I won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And I'm like, wait a second. You're the expert. You're the guy that they brought in. You know what I mean? So there's when you start pulling back the covers, it gets very tricky, very, very quick. So Bo mentioned enclave, which we're using a variation of that theme, if you will. But if you're not careful, you'll have, I guess, like a better term, leakage. But then it comes down to is, what is that? So for example, maybe Bo knows the answer, but like, is G code CUI? And you know what I mean?
Well, people talk about G code a lot, Jim.
Yeah.
And the DoD hasn't made an official call, but what's been talked about in several circles is not that most people don't want to treat G code as CUI. I mean, that's just the answers. Most organizations don't want to do that. I don't know if the DoD is going to let them get away with it.
Because you can't.
Well,
right?
yeah, because I mean, that's the, I won't say that's the hardest question, but that is one that would make life a lot easier if we could just say that.
I got hard questions, but I think the net of it is that if you're like a lot of the DIB is manufacturing, right? So the reason why G codes are very
100%.
a lot of people are cutting and bending in metal, right? So and if you're dealing with any kind of like super serious stuff, you're going to be IL 5-6 anyway. So you're in a different you're in a different spectrum. So a lot of the people who are impacted by that, especially the level 2, these are challenges. And then there's variations like what is considered, what is considered. So basically when we're talking about scope, what I'm trying to say is as you start to look at your scope and controlling the flow of that particular data, it becomes very difficult to understand where is that boundary in some cases. How far does that control responsibility go? And that's where it gets a little tricky as well.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to be combative about it, but I'm like, the organization can actually set, their manufacturing equipment shouldn't be public facing. So, I mean, there should be ways they can use firewalls to actually limit the control so that you can actually, it doesn't matter if it's CUI or not, because you can still have it in there. Because as long as it's blocked from the internet, we did this through software, you can actually show it's an isolated environment and you can protect it. It's not like you can actually, because I know people are like, G-codes are, well, it depends on how you build your environment and you make it so that area is like completely controlled. So even if whatever's in there is safe, you can show that, Jim. I mean, you can actually, even small companies can do that. They've been talking about that for years, that you can actually show that you've isolated that environment. So like you're using, I don't know, thumb drive or whatever to get it over there. Or, you have a hole in your firewall into that section that can go from a jump box. But there are ways you can do that and show that. I mean, what I've seen with auditors from multiple government audits and from CMMC, they're reasonable people. When you show the controls you're doing to actually get stuff onto the manufacturing area, you can actually have compensating controls. You can actually show how you're protecting, you're minimizing the risk.
Sure, but I think there's a lot of advances in manufacturing, additive manufacturing, and digital engineering that require a lot more interaction. So it's not like you can put it on a thumb drive because it's there's a lot of things that are at play. So it's not like you're just taking it and like you're printing it. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things, and that's where it starts to get complicated. So I know a lot of guys that are doing, a lot of CNC stuff, right? They have farms of CNC and they got firewalls blocking it all. That is a solution. But as you get into certain types of digital engineering and rapid prototyping, which is exactly the way things are going, right? Mm-hmm. That becomes even more complex, right? But again, like I said, it wasn't the hardest question in the book. But I'm just saying is as you start to to get back to James's question about round scope, is as you start to drop those walls down, something pops up. You're like, okay, here's how I'm interpreting it. How would an assessor interpret that control? And that's, I think, you having so much time and exposure. And you even said before, you're a certified assessor, correct? Lead assessor, if I remember what you said, right? So you're coming at it from a unique position because I would say you're one of what?
300 maybe?
Right. Okay. So
I'm probably one of the only one of those that's not doing assessments, right? Yeah, one of the maybe 10% that don't do assessments, right?
100%, right? So there's hundreds of thousands of folks like me that can only estimate at this current point in time how the assessor is going to interpret that particular control.
I think it would behoove most of these companies to spend $3,000 and become CCPs, professionals. I really do think there's some benefit for that. If your business is like, my business is independent on this, there's a whole lot of value. And if not taking the test, at least go through the class, because you will learn, you'll get a lot out of them. Obviously, I had to take both classes to get the certification I did, but we actually had 2 other people go through the first class just to help me, because we're multi-billion company. We're just under 2 billion. We want to make sure we don't lose our ability to lose our biggest customers, right? Yeah, it's actually, obviously $1 billion issue for us, right? So that we invested in me and then also in 2 other guys becoming CCPs, CMMC certified professionals.
Can I ask a question? Because this is interesting. You guys go back and forth. What I want to know is, when I look at something like CMMC, how prescriptive, but I mean, like, how technically in depth is it from a controls perspective? Because we talk about controls all the time, and depending on who you are and what your background is, the concept of controls is either the answer or part of the problem. All right, and I mean that by, like, yes, controls are like it's a broad application or broad non like an advisory way of doing something. For example, you could say you should have a software security program. You should be checking your logs daily. You should not have open connections to the internet. That's cute. And I think some of that does make sense, right? But how in depth does this particular thing go? How prescriptive is it?
There's 320 actual test questions, right? Of those, half of them are documentation approximately. Half are technical. Some of them can go really far down the rabbit hole as far as like mobile code. I don't know if Jim's had to do that, but we had to jump through hoops to prove that we were blocking mobile code. And that was a lot harder than I thought it would be, especially for a 1-point question. Like you could actually you could actually get this one wrong and still pass kind of a question. That it was actually fairly complicated. And then of course you have to show the MFA, multi-factor authentication, anytime you're going all over the place. And then, like I said, FIPS, they get soon. So I would say maybe 100 out of the 320 ballparking are actually fairly technical. And I don't know, Jim, if you've gone through it. I've never tried to list them like, oh, this one's a pain in my keister. This one is just documentation hell. But, like, I've never tried to scope them that way. But I would say at least a third, maybe a quarter to a third are very technical. I don't know, Jim, when you went through it, is that something you thought about it?
100% agree. And I think also, and I would add to that, there may be an aspect, and I won't go into detail unless you guys want to know, but like, for example, wireless or dealing with authenticating mechanisms. So he mentioned, for example, MFA, and there are certain sort of things you must have in place. By the way, just to put it out there, security information by default is CUI. We haven't talked about that, right? So the CMMC is about protecting.
That's a nuance thing. I don't know if we want to go that deep. It's security protection data is protected the same as CU, controlled and classified information, yes. But it is not controlled and classified information. But it has anyway. I don't want to go down that because it has the same requirements. But I'm okay with that because I'm hoping my security information would be protected. Because if that got out, I mean. Okay, I just see. Yeah, there's that data too. So it's not just contractual document. That's what he's talking about. It's not just contractual documents, but your system security plan could have, if it has your vulnerabilities in it, which most of us do have. If you have if you're showing a weakness in there, technically it's security protection data. Our organization, this is not something anybody else has to do, but we do monthly vulnerability management reports where we talk about the state of the network or the state of the company every month. We've been doing that for a little over 50 episodes, right? Over almost 4.5 years now. And those are all security protection data. So we protect them the same as if they were controlled unclassified information, what Jim's talking about. But it's easier for us in this regard because we took the enterprise approach, right? And that's where Jim, it's like, if you're trying to do this in a small box or an enclave, it's real. That's why we, as some guys and I've talked to, find it really hard for organizations that aren't just doing this as a super niche, small part of their company to make the enclave work, because it permeates your network, and it's really hard to keep it out of places. It's a lot easier in some regards to do the enterprise than it is to actually try to block it off from going places. Anyway, maybe Jim's had success with the enclave.
No, totally agree. Well, how we're using enclave is a little bit different from other scenarios. I think there's somewhat a longer conversation, but we're not trying to peel off a component and shove it into the cloud in that sense. We're just we're doing some interesting things in that space. But the point about the technology piece, though, is as you look at something and you're just like, okay, well, now it's going to be producing security information that we also need to protect. So it creates an adjunct. So if you really want to not only achieve the intent, right? Because, I'm a patriot. I don't want people stealing things that we're doing 100%. So I need to make sure that we're doing it in such a way that also meets the intent, but meets the, lack of a better term, letter of the law. and also ensures the business can run effectively and efficiently. So you run into these situations where it may not seem technical on the front end, and you realize, wow, there's like 5 more layers. And to Bo's point is the R2, which is the thing that's in my mind until I need to worry about R3. And I agree with you, by the way, that's 3 years down the road, my personal opinion as well. So we definitely agree there too, is you have this control as a objective, if you will, and then there's these components under it. And you have to meet all those components to facilitate that. And it's always like that 5th or 6th one that sort of tries to tie it all together. And that's when you realize you have these secondary, tertiary things, and that introduces a technical challenge over here. So just imagine a world where you're still trying to hunt down where you have the data, even though you're just going to go enterprise, which is, I agree, that's the best way to go, but that's what we've done. And then you're, as you start to pull the technology in, you see all these weaknesses. So even though I agree, it is 1/3 very technical, even when you're doing some of the documentation and sort of lining things up and proving that you have these capabilities, it ultimately comes down to is you have to protect data, right? And how it's moving through your environment. And that opens you up to a lot of technical challenges.
One thing that can help you, and I'm not saying this will work for everyone, guys, but one that could help, if you spend the money and get, well, you need to have a data marking capability. I mean, if you're using Word, you can use Purview, I don't care. But you have to do that. You have to mark the document, otherwise you can't find it. But if you actually spend a little money on a data loss prevention tool, it can address a lot of the challenges Jim is talking about, because we do have legacy systems in the network that we can't get rid of. But we can block them off with our tools. We can say, controlled unclassified information cannot go there, and we can show that how that can happen. We actually show that to auditor, like, you can't send that file, they'll try. We show them, and it can, otherwise it's not a requirement, but it really does help grease a lot of the hard problems when you're trying to deal with a real network. I mean, everyone deals with legacy. I mean, that's just, I don't care who you are, unless you're a home office, you have to deal with, there's going to be some reason you have some old stuff in your network. And that can save you. It's really helped us being able to use a data loss prevention tool as almost like an application firewall, right? We can actually stop stuff from going to places we don't want it to, and it's unemotional. They're like, how do you know? Well, we can show you.
Guys,
so that's the best advice.
Yeah. So sorry. I want to wrap this up and do a nice bow. So I want to ask. I'll ask this, and I don't think this is going to be super controversial. Hopefully, it doesn't open up another can of worms. But kind of final thoughts on this, okay? As with any regulation, there's always the debate over, is it too loose? Is it too tight? Does it exclude? Does it make it difficult for companies? Does it make it too easy for attackers? Where does this particular one, and I'll give you guys both a chance to answer, but where does this particularly lie in your opinion, of course, right? And Bo, I want to start with you because you're kind of the assessor or the auditor. Where does this lie? Is this set the bar high enough, too low? Like, what's your gut?
I think we have to be careful here, because the requirements have nothing to do with CMMC. CMMC is just the assessment of the requirements. That's all that's changed in the last year. So like what people are complaining about from an outside disinterested party might be like, well, were you not telling the truth for the last 7 years when you've been accepting government money? I'm not going there, but I'm just any further than I have. But I am saying these controls are valid. As someone who's been attacked, someone who's fought through attacks, someone who's done attacks, these controls are not bad. I mean, MFA, MFA isn't the end all beat all, but it really works pretty well. Unfortunately, pass the hash is a function of the operating system. So there's always going to be a risk of it. I mean, you can monitor for it and all that kind of stuff, but there is no perfect security control. I mean, what there is, though, is just like in the physical world, it makes it harder for them to get in. And if you implement these things like FIPS encryption, multi-factor authentication, a strong configuration management policy, actual risk assessment, so you can actually get buy the stuff that actually addresses risks, you can do pretty well. And I don't know, we've been able to justify to our business, some expenditures to make us more secure. And then we avoid that whole argument of security versus compliance, which I know we kind of haven't talked about, because most people who have that argument are people who just are afraid of compliance, right? Because they don't think they'll pass the audit.
Yeah, so I don't want to go there. That's an ugly conversation. Yeah. All right, I appreciate it. Jim, thoughts? I'll give you the last word here.
I'll make it super quick. One is I don't think the requirements are outlandish. I mean, 171, for all intents and purposes, is a tailored set of controls that were derived from 853, which have been around for a long time, right? So these are controls that are totally reasonable in many cases. The challenge is, and I go back, and we've had this conversation many times, privately and on this show about, how do you find the data that really matters, right? How do you do that? And like Bo said, we've implemented those technologies. So we have like information firewalls essentially all over the place, right? So it is kind of doable. It's just that sometimes what is CUI can kind of morph and kind of move around a little bit, which can be challenging, but there is technology. So it is totally reasonable. And I think it comes down to also and I experienced this back in the days of HIPAA. I experienced it with PCI. I experienced it with BS 7799 Part 2 audits. I've been in this on this train for a while. And when these things first kick off, assessors, auditors, or whatever, they're very much focused on it's still a learning process. What controls does the community feel that this is a reasonable, meaningful control? And to Bo's point, yeah, I need to go probably get that certification so I understand what people are talking about. But in the beginning, it's very intense, right? It's very super close, tight knitted. Like, I think you should be doing it specifically this way. And I think that's the ambiguity that I think makes it a little tricky. And the cost of the assessments are hopefully will get, they're a little bit high right now, in my opinion. I will say that. But other than that, I think the requirements are completely reasonable.
All right. Well, I think anytime you get something new, the first couple waves of my concern is always the same as it is for anything CMMC is. I remember the old when like about 4 years ago, the rules came out. They're going to do a whole new version. They're going to add some things to it. People freaked out and said, "Hey, there's half of the." Or more than half, 60, I think it was like 60% or something, 70%, some crazy number of the companies that would have had to go do this compliance framework and meet these requirements, like couldn't afford to do it. So they're like, well, then they lobbied and everything got peeled back. And now we're in, and so cost is always a problem, right? Cost is always a thing, but you guys are telling me it ratchets up security. You feel good about it. I can feel good about it as a patriot because I obviously don't want our foreign adversaries stealing our stuff. So that's a good place to wrap it. James, I think we talked to Lisa, and I'm pretty excited about that. I like being quiet on these. It's just listening and soaking it in. It's really good. Jim, thanks for once again sharing your expertise from your temporary mobile office because your router literally blew up. That was nice.
Yep.
And Bo, always good to have you on board, buddy. Thank you so much for your sharing your expertise, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been it. Another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast out. Catch us on LinkedIn. Catch us on YouTube. Hey, keep sharing the podcast. Whatever it is that you're doing, it's great. I appreciate everybody's inputs. I always love it when you guys share it. I always love it when somebody new says, "Hey, started listening," and gives me suggestions. So until next time, we'll catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. So long, everybody. Bye-bye.